Have you ever struggled with grief over the loss of someone you love, or maybe a relationship not panning out the way you had hoped, or maybe even the loss of a dream or a transition in your life? Today, we're going to talk about different types of loss, and I'm joined with Melissa McKinney, who's going to tell us a little bit about just grief in general and what are some different type of losses that we can experience, because grief just really isn't always about losing someone, that you can also lose other things. So welcome, Melissa.
Thank you for having me be a part of your recording today.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the different types of loss.
So one of the things that I've, continued as a therapist and just in my own life, there's so many more things that grieve, death of loss. Like one that I work with, they're grieving the loss of a pet. A friend has been with them for probably the last 10 to 15 years of their life, and just such a difficult transition that they're going through. Losses can be something like losing a friendship. Sometimes we go through to maintain relationships, but then times we're not. We due to moving, relocation can be a loss for some, deaths of classmates, changes in careers, the loss of an ideal. Maybe we hoped we were, and we couldn't pass the test to be able to get into medical school, or, maybe we had a dream that we would be a singer. Those are some of the things that consider, something to grieve over, but there's an unmet expectation that happens when those goals aren't met. One of the things I'm hearing more about is financial insecurity. People afraid, are my finances enough? I thought I was going to do this, and we had some unexpected medical bill, or we had an unexpected expense, and maybe, some of the things that grieve, hope deferred, there's a scripture, and it makes the heart sick. And so when we have these hopes and they don't come back, or
I even know for me, I've experienced loss of like what I thought things were going to be, and then maybe it didn't happen the way that I anticipated, or like you said, loss of a pet. I mean, that is part of your family. That is like somebody you build memories with, and sometimes that's a lot harder than people anticipate. Or like you said, just loss of expectations of what you thought life was going to be, and how to navigate that. And there's a lot of unexpected challenges that can come, kind of like you were saying, that then can create this sense of loss. So, Melissa, what are some of the different reactions that you see people because I guess one of the things we're doing is just trying to normalize that loss can be a bunch of different things. And it can also be losing someone you care about. But how do you see most people react to grieving things that they've lost, or loss of different things in their life?
One of the things I see most often is people tend to just move on. They don't feel like there's space or time to be able to grieve that loss. And because we don't really think about it as grief, we don't associate it with processes like going through sadness, going through bargaining, where we begin to ask ourselves questions. Well, if I should have, what if I had done this? What if I had done that? If I had this wouldn't be the outcome now. So we don't even realize that we go through the 5 stages of grief that Kubler-Ross talks about, but we do it more often than we realize. What I find is that most people say, I just don't have the time. I have to keep living.
Yeah.
So I don't have time for that, and so they don't give themselves the proper time, don't have anyone maybe to share, their heartfelt desires and, what they're feeling. They don't have safe places, they feel, to be able to talk about those things.
What happens if somebody doesn't give themselves the time to grieve and say like that's, and like you said, part of it is just first acknowledging that it's okay to be sad and grieve the loss of this thing, that sometimes people may not feel like they have the permission to grieve this thing because they should just be okay with it, and that it's okay to feel sadness and loss. But what would you say happens when people don't give themselves the time to process or grieve the loss of whatever it is that they're facing?
One of the things that I see most often happen is that that loss is usually compounded by something else, and by something else, and by something else. And so over a period of time, we have all these different life changes. At one point, you can be single. In the next point, you might be a parent. There could be another life change where maybe now you're taking care of a parent.
Yeah.
Your children are transitioning to school and you weren't prepared for that. Maybe you're in a situation where you were married and now there's the discussion of divorces on the table. That had never been a consideration. You always had this idea, married till death do us part. So these things become compounded, and they can sometimes become health-related issues. Maybe we now have anxiety. We didn't have that before.
Yeah.
Maybe now we have depression. Maybe now we might have high blood pressure, or, related illnesses that come from this compounded sadness, grief, and loss. And because we had to continue living, I have to continue going to work. I must continue maintaining all of that's how, individuals end up on my couch.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, I was just thinking about it as you're saying this, because I follow this therapist who, she's amazing. She's like probably in her 90s though now, Melissa. And she was she was in the Holocaust and she was able to survive. She's a survivor from the Holocaust. But she talks about grief a lot. And one of the things she says is that grief not expressed becomes repressed. And when we repress things like you're talking about over a period of time, and you repress this loss and then this loss and then this loss, and then it never gets a place to be expressed or to be processed and then to be healed, then it can come out in other ways that you're not expecting a little bit further down the journey. And so I think what I'm hearing you say is part of living is experiencing loss. Like, absolutely. I don't think any of us is going to get out of here without having some type of loss, whether it be loss of people that we care about, whether it be loss of dreams, whether it be loss of relationships, loss of financial security, whatever it is. But it's how do we learn to express that? And then I know you're going to tell us a little bit about also how to cope with that. But I do think one of the things you're talking about too was like that people do deal with loss a lot of different ways. So absolutely. One of them is avoidance, like you said. Some of it is like, we can't look at that, right? Like busyness, where they're busying themselves, which is a form of avoidance. But what are some other reactions that you do see people kind of go through in a grief process?
A lot of isolation. People begin to isolate themselves. They will change their normal habits. If I'm an outgoing individual, I may become more sullen, more withdrawn, more quiet. Then there are those that become explosive. They don't know how to deal with their loss of family, loss of ideals, and of course, in extreme cases, people will self-medicate. They overeat. They may use drugs and alcohol in an effort to be able to numb those periods of time. I find that a lot of people who are repressed, their memories are also, there are gaps within memory. And so people will come and they'll say, I just don't remember that period of time. I remember this, but I don't remember that. And I tell people who deal with repressed emotions, repressed memories, the brain does a really, really good job of helping us to stay in survival mode.
Yeah.
It does its job. And sometimes that activity, the brain will help us to forget it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is how we can continue moving forward so that we can, do the things that we need to do at that moment. In my own experience, my grandmother died in my early 20s. I was still in school. I was a semester away from graduation. I don't remember anything
Yeah.
except the moment that I heard the news that she had passed. It wasn't until 25 years later I saw a program from the funeral. I did not even remember that I had participated.
Yeah.
My brain did its job in protecting me because I needed to finish school that semester. I had to get through that class, and then I had one more semester. I had to continue to keep moving forward, even though I was in deep, deep depression. But
Yeah.
I could not acknowledge it. I did not. If I had acknowledged it, I probably would have fallen to pieces, and maybe no one would have been there to pick me up.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you bring up a good point, is that our brains are there to help us survive, right? Like, help us get to the next place. And I think sometimes it is because things are too painful. And if we really are expose ourselves to that pain, it is a fear that maybe we'll never be able to get out of it. Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so in an effort for survival, then it helps us. I just think about, what I've heard is like people that, like, this is going to be extreme, but like if they lose a limb, how they sometimes can't feel it initially. Like they can feel it, but it's almost like a shock because it's, how do you keep on moving forward? And I've never had that experience, so I don't know. But I think the same thing happens mentally or emotionally, where our body sometimes goes into shock, and to protect ourselves, we just keep going. But at some point, it is going to cost us. So like you said, at that point in time, you probably didn't, your brain kicked into overdrive and did what you needed to do to complete and finish and move forward. But at the cost was the fact that you were starting to feel, depressed. Essentially, grief that was not expressed then became depressed in a way. I mean, if that's the way you want to look at it, until you were able to sit down and actually process that. But sometimes we just get so busy in life, we keep on going, and we never get a chance to really process that grief. And what I've found, I don't know if you've had this experience, when people just have a safe space to just tell their story and process the loss of whatever it is, there is a lot of healing that can come with that.
I do. It takes an individual great courage to make a decision to begin the process of therapy. And when they get there, they are so on edge and nervous, not knowing what to expect. And even those that have been in counseling or therapy before, they still are nervous because once again, I hashed this story to someone new. And I'm just hoping that I can make a safe connection with someone who will hear what I have to say and validate what I feel.
Yeah.
They just want to be validated.
Well,
am I crazy? They ask, am I crazy in what I think and feel?
Yeah. Yeah. And you're like, no, you're human.
Right.
I know, but that is something too. I think as we're even talking about this, part of being human, like we said earlier, is part of experiencing grief. But I think somewhere along the way, whether it be our cultural beliefs that are pushed, our religious beliefs, I mean, all kinds of things that are influence our way of thinking, sometimes we almost think, okay, then that's not something I should be sad about. Or I know that you work a lot with trauma, Melissa, and I know that I was listening to another therapist say something the other day on a podcast or whatever, and he brought up a good point that a lot of times people that are either grieving or even in trauma, they start to do this comparison. Well, my grief, why should I be sad about that? Because this other person just lost this, this, and this. Why should I be sad about my loss of a dream when they lost their, like their grandmother? Or why should I be why should I be sad when this person has dealt with all this stuff? Or why should I worry about my trauma when this person went through a much more traumatic? So you start having this conversation with yourself that says you really shouldn't be sad about that, or you shouldn't be upset about that because other people have got it worse than you. But the reality is that your experience is your experience, and
Yeah.
grief looks different for everybody. Everybody reacts differently to grief from what you were just talking about. And the way that we're going to move forward from that grief and heal from that is going to be different for each person as well. But having just a safe space to be able to unburden in a lot of ways, or tell the story of what our experience has been like, can be very transformational, especially if it's a safe space where somebody supports them and validates their experience, where there might be other people in their life that either don't validate it, or themselves, they may not always validate their own experience as something worth having an emotion attached to.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with all of that. I have found in my experience that when an individual is given an opportunity to be able to share whatever their truth is, whatever their experience is, within a week, they will notice considerable change within themselves. Just because they were able to share it in a place where it was safe, there was no judgment, there was validation. And no matter how big or small the trauma, the loss, they were able to, they were given permission. It doesn't matter how big it is or small it is, but you have the place and space here and are given permission to feel however you want to feel about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To be able to acknowledge, this happened to me. This is my experience. And we don't realize the impact of a lost dream. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Because that dream could have been, I wanted to be a parent and now I'm not. That dream could have been, I wanted to stay married till death do us part. Now I'm not.
Yeah.
The dream could have been, I wanted two parents in my life and I did not have that.
Mm-hmm.
The dream could have been, I wanted to be on the Supreme Court and I ended up being, I had to make a different career choice.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. And it's not, sometimes those changes aren't about academics. They're not about smarts. They're simply about things that happen within the family. Maybe I had to take care of someone. Maybe I didn't get the support from family and they talked me out of my dream.
Yeah.
They convinced me that, no, you can't do that. That's not smart. Why would you want to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Because they have their own idea about how your life should be.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they will, and we don't realize the impact and the influence family will have on us as individuals. I know, I love my mother. She was great. She had ideas and, she did the best that she could to lead and guide me. But, but then I had my own disappointments. I made choices.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had to live with those choices. And I didn't always like the aftermath of the choice, where that deep regret would come in and just sit.
Yeah.
Like you wear regret like a coat. Those are the hard places in our lives,
Yeah, it is. And I think one of the things that I appreciate, you sharing is we all have these experiences. It looks different from each of us. But I don't know about you, Melissa, but I know in my time doing this work, and I know that you can echo this with 100%, is that, we really have a gift for being able to hear people's stories, where we get to hear people's stories that not everybody does, right? And what we've come to realize, and I'll definitely speak for myself, is that we've all individually experienced things like regret and loss, but I can assure you that other people have as well. And it is a part of living that we have to find our way through. And the more we can find our way through it, then hopefully we can then release those things that have held us down, whether it be regret or shame or loss or sadness, and then be able to move more fully forward into the future, whatever that looks like. But what are, Melissa, some different ways that people can cope? I know we've talked about being able to have a safe space to share it, but cope with loss.
Well, let's just say you don't have anyone to talk to. Therapy is something that is always very helpful. It does take a lot of courage to make that first phone call, to set up that appointment. If you have spiritual leaders or influences in your life, you can always talk with spiritual leaders. But if you can't find that safe place, journaling is always one of the better ways to be able to get your feelings out. There's a book by a gentleman by the name of John Deloney, and it's called I don't remember if it's Redefining Anxiety. But one of the things I love about what he talks about is when we think about the thoughts, because what happens is all of these emotions we have, they become thoughts that continue to swirl, almost like a blender full of,
Yes.
you can make a thought smoothie with all of the thoughts that we keep. And what happens is what we focus on, we magnify. So if I'm focusing on something positive, then I magnify that in my life. If I focus on all the things I've lost, I will magnify that in my life. And one of the things he suggests strongly is to journal those things out. And then after a week or 2 weeks, go back and read what you've written. Challenge the thoughts that you have. Demand evidence from them. What you will notice is patterns in thought. You will also notice those things that are really not true.
Yeah.
And then when the thought comes back around, you can say, you know what? I have evidence now. That's actually not a true thought. That's not a truth in my life. And then you can scratch that off the list. Because what happens is all these thoughts that keep swirling around, they do have the capacity, the potential to create anxiety in our lives because we can't seem to get beyond what we think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a great, I think, recommendation because, and it is redefining anxiety. So you got it right. I just checked really quickly for us to make sure. If you want to read that as a resource, but I will say, even for myself, the journaling component, and I think this is where, like, you think about artists, where they do a lot of their expression, and we're all artists in our own way, okay, folks. I can draw stick figures, but I am still an artist. Okay. But I mean, I think about songwriters who write songs. A lot of that comes from their own processing of things that they've lost or experienced, right? I think about a lot of poets or writers or, any type of creative expression. But I think part of that creative expression, if you're like, Christy, I'm not going to be writing a song no time soon, is journaling. And I actually went on a poetry retreat, and I am not a poet. It was just, I was going to go try to be one, or at least express myself. And I will say that just being able to write some things down with some prompts to help me reflect on things in my life or hard things that I've overcome, it was very freeing to just be able to write it down, write my truth down, and then be able to express that truth with people in a safe space. And so journaling is a way to do that. Like Melissa said, sometimes being able to even talk with somebody like a mental health professional or even somebody that is a spiritual leader, I think or even if you have someone in your family, sometimes people don't have this, but there might be somebody in your family or friends who is kind of like the gurus of of like the family or friend group. Sometimes if they're a safe space, then that might even be somebody you can talk to as well. But just really being able to find some form of expression, it sounds like is a good way to be able to cope no matter what that form is. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then, people can also, what I find is what happens over time is as you continue to repress, then you decrease those enjoyable, pleasurable things that you used to do. And they no longer become a part of your daily activity or even weekly or monthly activity. somewhere along the path, you no longer have room for those things. So I would encourage people, go back to those things that brought you joy. At some point in your life cycle, there's been something that you really, really enjoyed. It could be going to museums. It could be taking a walk in the park. If you have pets, play with your pets. Petting, there's actually studies out that show how when you have pets and you engage with them, it releases endorphins in the brain, the happy chemicals that make us feel good. It is amazing what a pet can do for you in your life. Support groups, if they have any in your area, those can sometimes be a definite support if you're open to being able to talk in groups. I find that a lot of individuals are shy. They prefer not to share information with strangers, but sometimes it's good to talk to strangers because they don't really know you.
Yeah. And I find like you said, I find people go either one or two ways. They're like, support group, yay, support group, no.
Right.
Well, Melissa, I really appreciate you coming and talking about this because I think it's such an important topic, grief in general, because I don't know about you, but I didn't get a class in school that said how to manage and deal with or cope with the loss and with grief. Did you get that school in class? I didn't.
No.
And it's something that's going to be a part of each one of our lives, just because of the nature of our human experience. But I appreciate you coming and talking about that today. I did want to just allow you an opportunity to kind of talk about who you serve here at Be Inspired Counseling and Consulting and who you work with and who you're passionate about working. So that way, if people listening, they're like, oh, yes. And I always say Melissa is like, you just go talk to her and you just feel your spirit lifted. That's all you got to do. But I'll let you share a little bit about who you serve and what you do here at Be Inspired.
Well, I work with children as young as 8 and adults into just older adults. I do actually have a certificate in gerontology that I obtained when I was a student at LSU. So I do love working with older adults. I find that they are fascinating. And because they have, they have history, they have experience. Those experiences can sometimes be wonderful to be able to build on while we are working together, because they have a skill set that other age groups they're developing. Yeah. And I am trained in EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And I am working on my certification for that. That by far is one of the most fascinating therapeutic techniques that I have ever learned. It is amazing what can happen when given an opportunity to distract the brain. The brain is powerful. It's probably one of the most powerful organs we have next to the heart. And it's amazing how the brain works and continues to keep us functioning and keep us continuing as survivor, surviving whatever it is we have to go through in our life cycle. So I love to learning EMDR, becoming masterful in it, and really, really like to utilize that when I have a client that I think is appropriate for that. I have worked with trauma. I've worked with children in the school system. So I do like to work with little ones. They are fun. I love the teens, and I enjoy working with them. The challenges that they face in today's society are much different. They now have social media and influences that we just did not have as I was growing up. So I did serve as a pastor and do still serve in that role. And so I do also provide Christian counseling as well, if that is something that an individual wants. And they get to make decisions about how we proceed and go forward. And so I always try to empower clients and let them know that I'm just here to help. I believe in toolboxes. And so when they leave, I hope to have given them a set of tools that they can continue to use in their journey. And that's like really important to me. If I can do anything for anybody, it is giving them the tools that they need to move forward. Now, if they decide to use, they get the decision to use them or not, but I will have provided them with the education and, the know-how on what to do with them. So
yeah, to be able to navigate. Yeah. Well, Melissa, thank
yeah.
you for so much for being with me today. If y'all watching have any other questions or things that you just kind of from our discussion today want to know more, please just leave us a comment and we'll get back with you on that. And if today, after you listen to us, you're like, you know what, maybe I do need to talk to somebody. I have had some things that I just really haven't dealt with that have been losses for me. Definitely reach out. Our number is listed above, and you can give us a call, or you can find us on beinspiredcc.com, and you can schedule something with Miss Melissa to be able to come and talk about some of those things. So thank y'all for joining us today, and we